This video contains scenes of violence that may be disturbing to some viewers. Please note that all scenes are staged, and no one was harmed during the filming of this production. Viewer discretion is advised.
Guess we should.
Yeah.
Before we start addressing the controversy, we also want to thank everyone for the crazy support on the last video.
95% of the feedback was actually all super positive, and we're glad that most of you found it valuable.
And as a thank you, we have something very special to announce. So make sure you stick till the end of the video.
We promise you won't regret it. However, the rest of the 5%, other than the nonsense hate, was either about the fact that we're overcomplicating a simple principle, which is just train hard and introduce progressive overload.
Or being the fact that the method is neither new, secret, or that there's a general lack of information. Which I find funny, since the other half of the criticism was of the contrary.
First of all, we never once claimed that it's a new method, since that would be contradictory. How can a method of training be new if it's something that top-level athletes have been using for years? So this criticism just really doesn't make any sense.
And second, the fact that it's not a secret method. Clearly these people have no idea how YouTube thumbnails or titles work. But either way.
I wish these same people would have hand-fed us this framework when we were starting out, and I wonder why they didn't. All right, because it took years of experimentation, both on ourselves as well as the people we coach, to find the perfect thing that works for most people, as well as input from other top-level athletes to make it perfect.
So it indeed was secret, or at least largely unknown. And it wasn't new, since athletes have been training utilizing this method, or at least something very similar to it, for years.
Now, with that out of the way, instead of harping on unnecessary drama that no one really cares about, let's get into what?
Bro, it's really cold here. Let's just get out of here.
All right. So, we'll be going through it page by page, going as detailed as possible, and again, just like in the last video, if you want to implement this training framework specifically for you in the best way possible, that would be probably through scheduling a consultation call with either me or Reynold, completely free of charge, no strings attached, and we'll get you sorted. A little heads up as to why the framework is structured the way it is. We've, over the years, done a lot of research on what specifically works best for us, and this is just the best we've found so far. In doing so, we've tested a lot of different methods, included but not limited to training basics alongside statics, which didn't kind of go all that well, linear periodization, also commonly referred to as classic periodization. It's basically a method of strength training taken from other sports such as powerlifting, strongman, among others. The goal being to increase strength in a specific movement or a plethora of specific movements. There's a great video from Dr. Yad where he uses this exact method for training front lever, and I definitely suggest you take a look at it. Well, this method is one of the best, if arguably not the best, if you want to specifically achieve 1 to 2 skills and master them. It doesn't really work if you want to be a super well-rounded athlete who can do planches, front levers, one-arm handstands, so on and so forth. You get the idea. Since you're very limited as to the elements you can chase and unlock with this specific method of training. So then we tried an approach that was pretty much something like focusing on 2 to 3 skills at once, while also throwing in dynamics as we saw fit. Spoiler alert, that also didn't really stick. After plateauing with that specific method, I went through a year or so of heavily experimenting with both volume and intensity alongside my friend, training partner, and somewhat of a mentor figure to me, Daniel Laizans. You might have heard of him. He's like a 2-time world champion. Either way, that deserves a whole video in itself, so I won't bore you with the details. But in short, with a lot of help from Daniel, and also I'd like to mention that it would have taken me a lot longer to come up with this framework, if not at all. So if you aren't already, make sure to drop him a follow, since he's, especially now, dropping a lot of good insights on specifically weighted calisthenics. We found that this framework is a kind of a hybrid of both strength training and hypertrophy, and we've also noticed that it's brought us the most sustainable progress with the least amount of risk for injury, as well as has allowed us to not degress or even lose other skills simultaneously. Since our goal is to be well-rounded athletes, we can't really afford to do a 3-month dedicated hypertrophy cycle followed by 3 months of dedicated skill training, since we'd probably lose a lot of skills in the process, and we kind of need those just in case there's a competition coming up, for example. If our goal wasn't to compete, we'd definitely give linear periodization another look, and so should you if your goal is just to only progress in 1 to 2 strength dynamic or static skills. But if that's not your goal either, this framework has worked wonders for the both of us, as well as the people we've coached over the years. So let's get into extreme detail on how this method works.
Okay, bro, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. One thing Paul didn't hit on in the previous video quite enough was consistency. With this particular framework, the most important thing, even above the exercises you decide to choose, is to train 3 to 4 times per week for the specific element you want, utilizing this framework. For the rest of the video, we'll use the planche as an example. Since most of the people we have coached, either their goal was to achieve the full planche or at least train it to some extent. And obviously, we're not claiming that this framework is perfect for everyone. And if we could coach every single one of you one-on-one, we would definitely use this framework as a starting point and see how we could make it perfect for you specifically. Just implementing on what we'll go over in the video will work just fine and give great results to 90% of people. The number one thing of reducing injury risk is a proper warm-up and good rest. We've seen a lot of people either not warm up at all or warm up for 30 minutes. What we have found is for most people, 10 to 15 minutes of warm-up is more than enough if you are not abnormally sore or training outside where it's cold. Since, depending on the skill you're going to train, a more specific warm-up, more often than not, is not only going to warm you up better, it also may take less time to fully get warm.
With the warm-up out of the way, we can finally get into more detail about the first sets. The whole idea behind 4-4-4, meaning 4 sets for each exercise, isn't necessarily because it's the best or most optimal set count by any means. It's just a very good baseline to start experimenting from. When training new skills, utilizing this framework, you might notice that you can do only like 2 to 3 sets of like a relatively bad form straddle planche for like 2 to 3 seconds, and then in the third set you're not even able to do a 1 second hold. In which case, doing the 2 sets of straddle planche would be completely fine, and then immediately moving on into the easier progressions. While I'm at it, let me answer 2 very commonly asked questions, especially about this framework. First of which being, when is it a good idea to move on to a harder progression in the first sets? And the answer to that is pretty much as fast as possible, but to give you some rough numbers, you should be aiming to do 7 to 8 seconds in each 4 sets, if it's a static movement. To use the planche as an example once again, if you're able to do 4 consecutive sets of 7 to 8 seconds, you are more than able to already start trying to progress into full planches. Obviously, it's not going to be pretty, but that's life. Second of which being, what would you define as decent form? And how long should the hold be for it to be worth doing? And once again, it'd be very dependent on the exercise you're doing, but to use the planche as an example, if you have 2 to 3 minor faults in form, it should be okay as long as you're able to hold it for like 2 to 3 seconds. Examples of minor faults, specifically in the planche, would be something along the lines of improper scapular protraction, bad hip placement, and not fully locked out legs or something like that. Just make sure it's not bent arms, since that would not be a minor fault. Before moving into the next 4 sets, a crucial thing to note, and a very common rookie mistake, is specific.
A lot of the people I've seen only take 2 to 3 minutes of rest in between sets, and that really grinds my gears. 2 to 3 minutes of rest is completely fine if you're training for hypertrophy. But once you get into doing max holds of the hardest progression you are able to do, which is effectively a 1 rep max, it makes no sense to only take 2 to 3 minutes of rest between sets. For instance, the best powerlifters in the world, after attempting something that takes all of their power, may take upwards of 8 to 10 minutes of rest before their next set. So, if 2 to 3 minutes is too little, how much should you take? I recommend to start out with 4 minutes of rest and then try upping it to 6 over time. And then find the perfect amount of rest where you perform at your best.
Bars!
Bars! Rap guys, hip hop! We found that 4 minutes of rest between complementary exercises works best for most people. 5 to 6 minutes between the second best variation sets being perfect, and 6 to even 8 minutes of rest between the hardest variation sets being best for performance. But 6 minutes tends to be more than enough. With some clarity on that, we can move on.
Again, it's pretty simple. You just start off with the hardest thing you're able to do, and then progressively move on into easier and easier variations. The number one thing in skill training is to train specifically for what you want. The idea behind going lower and lower on the progression ladder is pretty much to build just as much time under tension as possible in the element you specifically want to achieve. To use the planche example again, if you were doing, let's say, first 4 sets of straddle, then here moving on into either advanced tuck holds or elevated planche holds would probably be the best idea. You can also do banded straddle planches here, but in general we're kind of against using bands, especially in the lower progressions, since most people tend to either abuse or misuse bands, and they end up getting stuck in a plateau since they've trained their body to only be able to support the weight of the exercise with band assistance. As well as they probably don't document the progress they're making to make full-on educated decisions on how to progress further. Obviously, there's exceptions to this rule, but I don't want to make this video 4 hours long, so I'll spare you the details. When should you prioritize form and when not to is a very, very nuanced topic that requires a whole video in itself that we're planning on making in the near future. However, for now, you can watch Nathan Bozic's video where he covers this exact topic. In the lower progressions, you should most definitely put a big emphasis on form, since even in this example, you'd be probably doing an advanced tuck. If, let's say, you'd be doing it with subpar form, all of those bad habits would translate into harder and harder progressions, and we definitely don't want that. So, focusing more on form in the second best variation sets would be more optimal, in my opinion. And again, with these sets, just as a reminder, 4 minutes of rest seems to work just fine for most people. And
That's my opinion. Now, let's move into the last sets. And this is probably the most nuanced part of the whole framework, since the exercise you choose here is probably the most important exercise for your overall progress. Let me give you an example. Here's a guy who's utilizing the 12-set framework, and his goal is to get the full planche as fast as possible. He's currently able to do a bad form straddle planche, and he did 3 sets of straddle holds, 5 sets of advanced tuck holds, and now he has to choose a complementary exercise since he's serious about progressing. From recording his sets and analyzing them, he found out that his main weakness is his shoulders. So, what exercise should he pick? A. Lateral raises, B. Elevated or regular planche leans, or C. Handstand push-ups. Well, all of these exercises are great and all of them target the shoulders. 2 of these lack the most integral part of skill training. If the guy's goal is to get the planche as fast as possible, then obviously the planche leans or elevated planche leans is the correct option, because he'd be targeting his weakness for the most part, and for most people, the shoulders give out first in this exercise. As well as he'd have more time under tension in the specific skill he wants to achieve. I give this example since most people screw up here. So make sure to choose correctly here and find out what that weakness is as soon as possible. Find an exercise that targets that weakness and that also has benefits for the general movement you want to achieve. And now, to finish out the video, no, fuck.
Before I get into the tips, I wish someone would have told us much earlier. I want to make one thing clear. We believe in training based off of data, not based off feelings. Since feelings can be deceiving, while data, more often than not, really isn't. I think a good portion of you have seen the famous Ben Shapiro clip where he says,
Facts don't care about your feelings.
And I think in this particular situation, the same applies. Obviously, it's very important to listen to your body and keep track of how sore you are and things of that nature. However, what I'm saying is don't let a bad day where you don't feel like energized, motivated, or anything like that keep you from pushing hard in your training. With that being said, let's get into the tips. Number 1. Document your progress. This is for the people who are really serious about progressing as fast as humanly possible. By documenting your progress, I mean you should keep track of each training, what you were doing, and I'm talking really specific. Just recording your sets won't be enough. You need to keep track of your hold times, rep count, band assistance if you use them. If we're using the planche as an example, in this case you'd be keeping track of form, hold times, especially hold times, weight, and other factors you can think of. Number 2 nicely ties into number 1, which would be recording yourself. When you record each set, not only do you have a nice backlog of footage that you can look back on once you've made a lot of progress and maybe even make a cool progress video, also you'll have a lot of good data that you can base your decisions off moving forward. You'll see exactly what's going on form-wise. You won't have to keep track of hold times, rep count, nothing like that. You'll just be able to fully focus in on doing your absolute best during your training. And number 3 is arguably one of the most important out of the bunch, if not the most important, since without this one, you won't be making any progress. And number 1 and number 2 effectively become useless. That being said, number 3 is progressive overload. Also, pretty simple in its nature. On a week-by-week basis, you're just trying to improve by a tiny bit of margin each week. To use the planche as an example once again, so let's say you've done 1 and 2 correctly, you've documented your progress, you've recorded yourself, so you have the data to support this decision. You have 4.6, let's say, seconds of hold in the straddle planche, let's say 8.7 seconds in the advanced tuck, and it doesn't really matter what's the last one. You're just trying to improve those hold times by a tiny bit of margin each week. And number 4, probably the most simple out of the bunch, but the one I most often see most people get wrong, it's sleep, eat, and rest. Pretty simple in its nature, but if you don't get proper sleep, proper food in your system, and you don't rest properly, then there's no real point in trying to optimize your workouts since you're not fully optimizing for progress to begin with. I like to say sleep is probably the most important here, since as natural athletes, probably the only thing close to an anabolic steroid you have is your recovery during sleep. So it's incredibly crucial, and you should most definitely try to get that sorted before even taking a look at anything else. Number 5, deload phase. It's not so much a tip as it is just something I wish I knew sooner. If you're feeling like you have a lot of bad sessions in a row and you're documenting your progress and it just doesn't make sense to have a big decrease in strength over 1 week, it's most likely a deload phase. So there's nothing to really worry about. It's just a thing you have to keep conscious of. It'd be a good idea to kind of track them before they happen, so you're not really surprised when they creep up. And for those of you who have stuck around, it's time to go. All right.
If you've made it this far, congratulations. Remember when I said in the beginning of the video? And as a thank you, we have something very special to announce. So make sure you stick till the end of the video.
We spent 3 months making the most detailed calisthenics beginners course we possibly could, where we get you from starting from absolute zero to doing the bare essentials of calisthenics, which we consider as 10 pull-ups, 15 dips, and 20 push-ups.
Why those numbers specifically? Because with our experience in coaching, those are the basics numbers you need to be able to do in order to show them. Start training more advanced calisthenics skills.
And I know what you're thinking. Calisthenics athletes, again, training for years, trying to make a living, selling programs. Same old story, all this time. But it might not be the case this time. So this course is actually already available on our website, caliboost.net. You might have heard of it. And it's discounted from the already low price of 20 euros, which is pretty much nothing, to a grand total of $14.99. Yeah, just kidding. It's free.
And let me elaborate on why we are doing this. Well, we want to educate as many people as possible and make calisthenics as accessible as possible for everyone. And in that way, we will popularize the sport. Cali Party, guys! CaliStarter, free! Check it out now!
And if you've made it this far into the video, that means you most definitely found it either entertaining or valuable in some way. So,
make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel because 90% of you who watched our videos aren't subscribed. So make sure to do that now and like this video.
if you're looking for more guidance, general guidance, personalized guidance, make sure to also book a free consultation call on our website,
caliboost.net.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. See you in the next video.
Cali Party.
Oi, oi, oi.